Secretary Panetta, we're honored to have you with us today. On General Dempsey, it's a pleasure to see you again. I had the opportunity and honor to visit you as you were deployed in Iraq on more than one occasion, and to work with you in your new position here. Mr. Hale, we're delighted to have you. America is blessed with the greatest military the world has ever seen. We must ensure that it remains so. I know you're honored, Mr. Secretary, to lead such a magnificent force. Defense is a core function of government, and the continued dominance of our military deters threats and encourages peaceful resolution of conflict. I fear, however, that the budget hearings today may not be a good use of your time. The Senate Democratic leadership is refusing for the third straight year to bring a budget plan to the floor. Has the Democratic majority forgotten the warning that Admiral Mullen gave us, our former chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who told us that the debt is the greatest threat to our national security? How will we be able to defend this country when we're broke? General Dempsey, the sequester, I know you feel is too draconian on the Defense Department. I agree, but it's a direct result of unsustained debt, and it does threaten our national security if we don't break that cycle. America leads the Western world in per-person government debt. Amazing. At $44,000 for every man, woman, and child, America's per capita government debt is worse than Greece. But the President has submitted a budget plan that will continue the unsustainable course and increase our gross federal debt by another 75% over the next 10 years, from about $15 trillion to $26 trillion in 2022. The President's budget also raises taxes by almost $2 trillion, those taxes not to reduce the deficit, but to pay for a $1.6 trillion spending increase above that we just projected, above what we reduced spending just a few months ago. In other words, he is spending $1.6 trillion more than the levels we agreed to in the August debt deal. Almost as shocking is the administration's unwillingness to tell the truth about our situation to the country. I sent a letter to the President's budget chief, Jeffrey Zients, asking him once again whether their budget plan increases spending relative to current law. A very simple question. I received a response last night that once again refused to answer this simple fact, this simple matter. If the administration thinks they can sweep this under the rug, they're wrong. Congress and the White House committed $2.1 trillion in spending reductions, about a 3% reduction in the expected growth, not a reduction in spending, but a reduction in expected growth over the next 10 years, resulting in a $45.5 trillion spending through 2022, total spending. This is the new ceiling on how much we can spend and the starting point for much needed reductions. Now, after just a few months, the President is proposing abandoning even those small cuts. This doesn't mean we should not reorganize where the initial $2.1 trillion in cuts falls. Under the Budget Control Act, the defense spending, 1/6 of the budget defense spending is, we will experience a 20% reduction in real dollars over 10 years. If this sequester stays, in real adjusted for inflation dollars, the Defense Department will take a 20% reduction over the President's budget over 10 years. Non-defense spending, the other 5/6 of the budget, will experience a 50% real dollar increase over that same 10-year period. So it is critical that we reorganize the Budget Control Act, but also we must not reduce the size of the total cut we promised the country just a few months ago, thereby increasing spending over the modest reduction that was agreed to. Instead, we should be taking thoughtful actions to place this nation on a sound fiscal path. The first step in the process is to dispense with some common myths about the defense budget. Senator Conrad made some points, and they provide insight. I'd like to provide some points I think also provide insight into where we are. Myth 1, The defense spending is at an all-time high. The truth, during the war on terror, it's averaged about 4% of GDP, around half the post-World War II average. 50 years ago, national defense made up 48% of the budget, while entitlement spending accounted for 26%. Next year, entitlements will be 60%, and defense will amount to 19% of the total budget. Myth 2, we can balance the budget by steep cuts to the Pentagon. The truth, over time, entitlement obligations will consume an ever larger share of federal spending. In 2030, amazingly, this is just 8 years outside our budget window. In 2030, entitlement obligations will be as much as 6 times greater than defense spending, rising from there. Even eliminating defense in its entirety would not come close to balancing the budget if you eliminated it entirely. Myth 3, defense spending has seen the fastest growth of any item in our budget. The truth, while the Pentagon's base budget has increased 10% since 2008, 3 years, it's increased 3% a year, non-defense discretionary spending increased 24%, not counting the stimulus during just the first 2 years of President Obama's presidency. So the cuts that showed in the non-defense discretionary are impacted a part of the Budget Control Act agreement that are projected out there, but it's from accelerated levels of spending that surged. Over the last 3 years, Medicaid has increased 37%, while the Defense Department's increased 10%. Spending at the Department of Education grew 70% over 2009 through 2011 compared to the previous 3 years of education spending. Food stamps have seen a 300% increase since 2001. Myth 4. The wars in Iraq and Afghanistan have been leading contributors to the deficit. While the war on terrorism has imposed substantial cost, this year's deficit alone, $1.3 trillion, equals the entire cost of the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq. War spending represents only 4% of the total government outlays in the last 10 years. So I share these numbers because it's essential that Washington engage in fact-based budgeting. Every department, agency, every part of government will have to experience reductions, including defense. I know you're working on that now, and it's a very important priority for you and for the United States Congress. But these decisions should be guided by an honest assessment of the facts, and the fact is that the only thing the President seems willing to cut significantly is defense. The rest of the budget will continue to surge out of control. By the year 2030, nearly every penny of revenue the government receives will go to the entitlement and interest payments, leaving no money outstanding for defense, education, highway, and other matters. So we should chart a different course, control the growth of government, and empower the private sector, and maintain a strong, cost-effective national defense. If we do this, we will create growth, good-paying jobs, reduce surging health care and energy costs, and pass a better future to our children. Thank you, gentlemen, for your service to your country, and I look forward to an important discussion today.